Today, I'm going to talk about processes and why I teach processes, how to use processes. It's going to combine the stuff we've talked about in the previous lessons of this course. But before I get into the details of this, let me just introduce myself and what we're doing here. My name is John Guy. I teach drawing fundamentals at an animation school and online. And I find that teaching online so actually, I'm still trying to figure out the best ways to teach online, if I'm being honest. I wrote a book that is free to download, and I've made some YouTube videos, but I don't think that that's like a full class experience, just videos in a book. Like if you went to class and the teacher just gave you a book and played some videos and didn't do anything else, you probably wouldn't find it to be a very good class. So I do these um, free classes as well to give people an example of how I teach and to kind of flesh things out and really help people get going. I also do one-on-one private mentorships. So if you want to get better even faster, then that's a good way to get that personalized attention, get that structure. That's really going to help you keep growing. But the free content I think is it's pretty good for being for free, and I definitely see people using it and getting better at art. So this is the ninth lesson of the Get Wins drawing course, which is available. Link in the description. Same thing with the book and the other YouTube videos. And in the previous lessons, I broke down theory and I broke down certain aspects of drawing, certain tools you can use for drawing, like visual measurement, like using cross contour lines to describe form, like structuring value, stuff like that. And in this lesson, I'm going to combine those into drawing processes. So this, you do steps, and each step is reflecting an exercise that you would have done earlier in the course if you've been following along. But before I get into this, I do want to talk a bit high level theoretical about drawing processes. Because a lot of artists, especially online, seem to want a step by step process that's going to guarantee that their art's going to look good. And that's not what I'm trying to do here. I wanted that too when I was coming up learning to draw. So it's understandable. Like you want a recipe that you know you're going to get the dish right. But in my experience, that's just not how this works. So it seems contradictory that I'm teaching a process and saying that processes don't work. And it's not that processes don't work, it's that they're not really enough on their own. And when you get more experience, you want to move away from processes and more towards responding to what's on the page and what's in your head and how it's going as it's going versus I do this step, then I do this step, then I do this step. Um, but the reason I teach processes is they get you experience and they do get some results. That gets you it gets you the experience so that you have the experience to not need to use a process anymore. You know the goal that you're trying to get to, so you don't need the directions of every step to get there. But you don't know that path until you've done it a few times. And processes just make it easier to find that path that works for you. Um, so yeah, that's my thoughts on processes. So, oh yeah, the other thing I wanted to say, um, I think of these as like training wheels on a bike. So if you just try to get on a bike and you've never ridden one before, you're not going to balance. You're just going to fall over. But if you put training wheels on, then it helps you keep your balance while you're learning to balance on the bike. And then eventually you take the training wheels off and you're just riding and you don't even think about how to balance anymore. That's kind of what I'm thinking about with these processes is they kind of like put you on rails a little bit when you're drawing and give you specific things to focus on. So you make sure you hit all the things that will help make your drawing believable and accurate. And after you've done this for a while, you know all the things that you need to do. You can just do them in any order that fits with what you're trying to do and how you like to work. So let's get into this. I have the chess piece that I've been using as a demo, and I'm working from photos here because if I had this on my desk, you wouldn't be able to see what I was drawing. Um, so, but when you're doing these exercises, I want you to use a real object because it is a very different experience drawing from real life versus drawing from photos. I explain why in the second lesson of this course. But TLDR is that you can copy from photos, but when you're drawing from life, you need to translate what you see from the 3D experience of seeing to the 2D image. So I'm going to do two processes. The first is the sketch process, and this one is more line-based. And it's going to be the first step is where we establish the position of the forms. And we're going to use gesture and visual measurement, which was lessons 4 and lessons 3. The second step, once we have the overall proportions and the big shapes blocked in, then we're going to do a contour drawing with CSI lines. And this was lesson 6. Put those on here too. Lessons 3 and 4. This one's lesson 6. And you could stop there, but I'm also going to do a cross contour slash cross hatching to describe the form and the light a bit better. And that is lesson 5. So I start with the gesture where I'm just not focusing on any individual details as much as trying to get the like overall ideas down and not super worried about accuracy at this point because I know I'm going to fix it. And yeah, I think that's enough of the gesture. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use visual measurement to check my proportions. And I'll use the height of the ball on top of the chess piece as my unit of measure. And this is that thing that if I was doing from life, I would be closing one eye and lining up my pencil. But this is the digital equivalent. So the first distance takes me to about the base. Yeah, it looks pretty good. And then the second one takes me to like the bottom of the piece. So my proportions ended up being pretty good just naturally. Maybe this could be a little bit lower, at least vertically. But this is where I would be correcting them if they weren't. And maybe they're a bit off horizontally, so I'll check that next. So the head should be about right. Yep. And then the base is just a little less than 2. This one's a bit more than 1. Let's see. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And the base is a little bit too wide. Go in and fix that. And now I'll just check some verticals and horizontals to see the alignment is there. So from the sides of the ball, yeah, maybe I'm a little bit off center here. So bring this out a little more. Bring this in a little bit. And maybe bring that out a little bit more. And then horizontally, things should probably just be aligning because it's symmetrical. Yeah, I think that's pretty close. So there's my proportions established. And if I was doing this traditionally, I would have done this with a very light touch, but this is digital, so I can just lower the opacity. And that was step 1, the position with the visual measurement and with the gesture and the visual measurement. So now I'll move on to step 2, which is describing my contours with CSI lines. Let's zoom in a bit for that. So this is where I follow the contours with my eye, making slow and careful observations. And then I describe those contours in my drawing with C, S, and I lines. At least as best I can. And I can really zoom in and just focus a lot on little details now in a way that would have caused me problems if I did it earlier in the process. Because I already figured out the overall proportions. So if I stay close to these proportions, it will end up being accurate enough. So whereas if I just start with every little detail, I don't like that contour. It's pretty easy to lose track of the overall proportions and end up with something that looks kind of off. But in this case, I already have the proportions more or less established. So I just need to focus on the specifics. Big picture is already there. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is I do want these classes to feel a bit more like a discussion than just me talking. Um, which is not to say that you have to talk, but this is what separates this from just a regular YouTube video is that we can interact. So if you're on mic and you want to add something or ask a question, just talk. Don't worry about interrupting me. If you're on chat, then just type in any questions or thoughts you have, and I will read them as soon as I see them. And there's step 2. I could probably tighten this up a little bit, but I'm pretty happy with it. And I could stop here, and I think this is a pretty decent drawing of the chess piece. Like, it definitely looks like the thing that it's supposed to look like, which is the goal. But I could also add more information, and that is where our final step comes, which is the cross contour slash cross hatching. So this was from lesson 5. This is where you wrapped lines around your subject to get used to describing the surface orientation, which describes the form. But this time, I'm only going to do it where it's darker. And the reason for that is because the lines that I add value and make it appear darker. So not only am I describing the light, or sorry, not only am I describing the form, but I'm describing how the light hits the form by doing this. I also think it looks better visually than just wrapping contour lines over everything. Like, that's good for an exercise, but I think this is better looking. And just like in the cross contour exercise, I'm trying to imagine my lines are wrapping around the form, describing its orientation in space. So that's why my lines have a little bit of curve here. I don't want to just fill in like stripes. I want to wrap my lines around the form. And it's up to you which direction you want to pull the lines across the form. Generally, you want them to be either perpendicular or parallel to the edges so it doesn't make the surface look oblique. But it's really up to you. And I'm going to change direction here. I think that looks better. And I could go further with this by making the lines thicker or putting more lines where it's darker. But I don't think I'm going to do that. So that's doing it with cross contour. I could also use cross hatching, where I go in both directions that are parallel to the edge. So wrapping around the other way. And this gives you more opportunity to add more lines where it's darker. But I'm not going to do that for the whole thing. That was just to show that you can do it and what it looks like. And then the other thing I can do, because I'm working digitally, is I can add brighter lines wrapping around the form for where I want the highlights to be. Or if you're working on like gray or brown paper and you have a white pencil, you can do this as well. So that's the sketch process. Any thoughts or questions before we move on to the next one?
Pretty self-explanatory to me.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
It's pretty self-explanatory to me.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so the next process would be the rendering process, and this one is more value-based. And the first step is the same. So step one is position. And that's the same. The next step is the value structure. So that would be to describe the light overall. And this is the 3-value and the 5-value studies from lesson 8. And then the last step is form. And this is where you blend the values together. And that is going to be with the value blending from lesson 7. And you still want to think about form, even though you're not wrapping lines around it. So think about lesson 5. I'm realizing one thing that I forgot to mention about these processes. The other reason I teach with them is because it gives you a better framework to evaluate your own work and to know what to do, to what skills you might be lacking in, where your weaknesses might be, and what exercises you can use to build them up. So each one of these steps is based on exercises. So if you find that your light doesn't look very good, then you can work on those skills by repeating lesson 8. If your proportions are off, then you can look at lessons 3 and 4. So I will keep my proportions from last time. It's the same process, so I'm not going to do that again. And I'm going to um, start with a darker background, maybe not quite that dark. Yeah, something like that. And I will start with a 3-value study, so that dark background is one of the values. And this is another one. Now let's go a little darker than that for my dark value. And now I'm just blocking in the shapes of the light and dark. And from here, I will do the 5-value study, which is where I add 2 more values for the darker shadow and the darker area in the light. And this stage, this is a bit medium specific. So with digital, this makes sense. With paint, this might make sense too. I know I'm going to blend these later. But for some media, like graphite, I probably wouldn't do. This is a completely separate step. I would add these values as I'm blending, which is the next step. But for digital, this makes sense to do it this way. And I mean, maybe for graphite, you could do these separate values and then blend them afterwards. But personally, I find that it doesn't work quite as well. But with digital, because you can infinitely change stuff, this method works very well. And now I'll add the darker shadow. And now most of the way there. It kind of looks like the chess piece, just especially if you squint, just a bit blocky right now. So the last stage, and this is by far the most time consuming, and that is to go in and blend it and get all those details, have it really look like the chess piece. Um, and how you do this is going to really depend on your medium. Digitally, I like to use a couple different brushes. I have this one that is soft, but also still has hard edges on the side. And I'll do most of my blending with that. And then sometimes, especially early, I'll use the airbrush, which is just soft all around. So that creates a nice smooth blend. But I don't want to airbrush too much or everything gets too soft and blurry. But early on it's good. And then I'll add those edges back in.
How
I
would
don't
you
really
do
have a
this with
method.
ballpoint pen?
Sorry?
How would you do this process with ballpoint pen?
Good question. So with ballpoint pen, I'd have to be more intentional of where I put my values because I can't. Here I can kind of push and pull them a bit more. If I was doing this with ballpoint pen, so I have a brush that is kind of similar to ballpoint, I'll make it dark blue. I would so I'll use more strokes where I want it to be darker. And to blend, I'll just gradually use less strokes. And it takes a bit of practice to do this. But it gives me a more gradual value transition. And it's pretty time consuming, I'm not gonna lie. But if you zoom out, you can see there's a bit of a gradient there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Is it also similar to graphite pencil or
Yeah. So with graphite, that's how I would work. Is by slowly building up using a lot of little lines. Um, some people use those like stump things. They're like, or your finger, but they're like, um, they're how would I word this? They're like things that you can push the graphite around and kind of smudge it. I don't like the way that looks, so I don't do that, but I know other people do it and it works for them. But yeah, graphite, I think graphite's even slower than ballpoint when it comes to rendering because you can get a more smooth render because you have more control of how dark your individual lines are, but it's also really slow. You want to build up versus trying to get one stroke where it's right. Or like one level of pressure where it's right. You add a little bit of graphite with each pass until it's blended the way you like. But I haven't done that in years because it's so slow. In digital, I usually do a lot of color picking as I blend. This is also the stage where I tighten in all my details. when you make the airbrush larger, you get a bigger gradient and softer edges. And when you do it shorter, you get tighter edges, which is another way to do edge control besides switching to a different brush. Now, I should say that I'm doing this a little bit faster than I normally would because I want this demo to fit in the time we have. Because this is, you could really, really get into the weeds refining these. And I think the time will make it look better up to a point. There's a point where you're just fiddling and it's not really changing much, but I'm nowhere near that point yet. Just to be clear, when I'm blending this, I'm blending this based on the light and shadow that I see and the forms that I see on the piece. I'm not just following a formula for like this is how to blend. I look for the soft edges and hard edges and value transitions that I'm actually seeing. The downside of this method is that you kind of end up with the value relationships being pretty similar throughout the piece, like the difference between the values down here and on the neck part and on the head part are all pretty similar because they all start from the same. But that's why this is training wheels process. Um, I really recommend doing this with an object that is all the same color. This makes it much easier. If the different areas had different colors, I'd need to do another 3 and 5 value, or I guess 2 because the background's the same, value study for each area that's a different color. And it just makes it a bit more complicated. Um, you also want to make sure that you're shooting or that you're using a an object with one light source. If you have more light sources, it just makes this more complicated. So um, let me find. So something like this, where I have the single light source on the subject that clearly defines light and shadow, that it makes this a lot easier. And then I can go in and I can add a cast shadow and stuff if I want. I'm not going to stay limited to the process. I can move away from it, actually. This is too small. Yeah, go add that cast shadow. Or actually, before I do that, I'll give the background a little variation too. Make it more interesting. And there we go. I can keep refining that and make it better. And I probably want to, but I don't want this. Like, I got other things I got to do today. I don't have time to just work on this until I really like it. So we're going to add some highlights, but mostly just leave it here. So that is our lesson today on process. Hopefully that was useful to you.
It was
Any
very,
very sorry?
it was very useful.
Very useful. Awesome. That's what I'm going for. Um, yeah, it's a little wonky. I could definitely plus this up a bit more, but that's what we got for today. Um, I will give you guys a chance to ask any questions or any closing thoughts before I wrap.
Before this lesson, after gesture and measuring was complete mastery, so really helped me out.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks so much. I'm glad I could help out. Um, all right. So that's the course for today. I do these every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, -8 UTC. Um, I'll have the next one scheduled on YouTube soon. Uh, if you want to be on mic during the next lesson, then you can join the Discord where I also stream these. So they're live on YouTube, they're live on Discord, they'll be live on Twitch eventually, and or even if you even for other things, the Discord has been pretty great. We got a really good crew of people who are trying to get better, and it's easier to do it with a community. So if you want to join that, the link is below, and you can get feedback. You can chat with other artists. I think it really helps to have other people who are doing the same thing you are. Get that community, get that motivation, and you'll see it work for other people. So that will prove to you that it can work for you, or at least suggest to you that it can work for you, which will motivate you to want to keep going. Like I said, this is part of the Get Wins Fundamental Drawing course that you can get access to the full course completely for free. That's in the link in the description. And the book that I mentioned covers all the material that I've explained today in text form and a whole lot more, which is also for free. You can download that with another link in the description. What's not free is the one-on-one mentorship. That is the strongest, probably best way I have for you to get good. Is we meet uh, one usually once a week, but as many times as you want. Uh, it's paid by hour, so how many times we meet is up to you. And I will review your work. I'll give you specific assignments and keep you doing what you need to do to get better and make sure you are actually doing it and it's actually working for you. Yeah, that's what I got for today. Thanks everybody for coming out, and I will see you in the next class. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.